Have you ever wondered what could turn strong, healthy sailors into walking corpses on the high seas? Picture men with rotting flesh, missing teeth, and minds consumed by fever-induced madness. This was the terrifying reality aboard colonial ships. Today, we're diving deep into the 8 most horrific diseases that transformed navigators into living zombies during the Age of Exploration. If you're ready to uncover the darkest medical horrors of maritime history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let's set sail into this nightmare. Observe the first victims as scurvy begins its silent assault on human flesh. Within weeks of departure, sailors noticed their gums turning a sickly purple-black color, swelling like rotting fruit left in the sun. The metallic taste of blood became their constant companion as teeth loosened one by one, falling into their morning gruel with sickening plops. By 1498, Vasco da Gama's crew reported that over 30% of his men showed early signs of this vitamin C deficiency. The worst part wasn't the physical decay. It was watching comrades become shells of themselves, their wounds refusing to heal, their skin developing dark spiderweb patterns beneath the surface, and the screaming only got worse at night. Witness how the plague transformed proud mariners into quarantined monsters below deck. The black swellings, called buboes, appeared first in the armpits and groin, growing to the size of chicken eggs within 48 hours. Sailors could feel the hard, burning lumps pressing against their clothing, each movement sending waves of agony through their bodies. Historical records from the 1630s show that ships carrying infected crew members had mortality rates exceeding 60%. The stench of decay filled the cramped quarters as men begged their shipmates to end their suffering, their skin turning black from internal bleeding. The lucky ones died quickly. Feel the relentless fever of typhus as it burns through entire crews like wildfire. Lice-infested clothing became breeding grounds for this bacterial nightmare, spreading from sailor to sailor through the simplest human contact. Body temperatures soared above 104 degrees, causing violent hallucinations where men saw phantom islands or believed their crewmates were demons. Dutch maritime logs from 1642 documented cases where typhus-stricken sailors jumped overboard, convinced they were diving into cool mountain lakes. Their skin became covered in a distinctive rash, dark red spots that looked like dried blood splattered across their torso. The fever never broke gently. Listen to the wet, rattling coughs that announced tuberculosis aboard these floating coffins. The disease spread through the recycled air of crowded sleeping quarters, each infected breath becoming a weapon against healthy lungs. Sailors developed the telltale night sweats, soaking their hammocks with perspiration that reeked of death and decay. English naval records from 1679 show that consumption, as they called it, killed more sailors than storms and battles combined. Blood-flecked sputum stained the deck planks, creating permanent dark patches that even harsh scrubbing couldn't remove. The coughing echoed through the hull until dawn. Imagine the horror of watching gangrene slowly consume a shipmate's extremities. Frostbite from icy North Atlantic waters often initiated the process, turning fingers and toes a waxy white before they blackened completely. The smell was unmistakable, sweet, putrid, like overripe fruit mixed with raw sewage. Portuguese records from 1580 detail amputations performed with carpenters, saws, sailors holding down screaming patients, while surgeons cut through bone and rotting flesh. Those who survived the primitive surgery often died from shock or infection within days. The severed limbs were thrown overboard, attracting sharks that followed the ships for miles. Contemplate the madness induced by pellagra as malnutrition ravaged sailors' minds. Known as the 4Ds disease, dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death, this condition turned rational men into babbling lunatics. Their skin developed a distinctive dark, scaly appearance, peeling off in sheets that left raw, bleeding patches underneath. Spanish expedition records from 1591 describe sailors who became convinced their own shadows were trying to strangle them. The mental deterioration was swift and merciless, with victims losing the ability to recognize their own crewmates within weeks. Their final screams haunted everyone who heard them. Visualize the intestinal nightmare of dysentery as it hollowed out strong men from within. Contaminated water and spoiled food became weapons of mass destruction in the confines of a ship's hull. Sailors developed violent abdominal cramping, that doubled them over in agony, followed by bloody diarrhea that never seemed to end. French naval logs from 1612 recorded instances where men lost over 40 pounds in 2 weeks, their bodies becoming living skeletons wrapped in loose skin. The constant dehydration caused their eyes to sink deep into their skulls, giving them the appearance of walking corpses. The latrines overflowed with blood and mucus. Observe how smallpox transformed familiar faces into unrecognizable masks of suffering. The disease announced itself with a fever that felt like molten metal coursing through veins, followed by the appearance of small red spots that multiplied like evil seeds across every inch of skin. Within days, these spots became fluid-filled pustules that merged together, creating a grotesque patchwork of swollen, weeping sores. If you think these maritime horror stories are intense, wait until you see what we're covering next, the surgical procedures they attempted without anesthesia. Make sure to share this video with anyone who thinks they know maritime history. Historical accounts from 1634 show survival rates as low as 20% once the disease took hold, with survivors left permanently disfigured by deep scars that resembled moon craters across their faces. The pustules burst and reformed in endless cycles of agony. Recognize the yellow fever's assault on liver and kidney function as it turned healthy sailors into jaundiced phantoms. These disease earned its name from the sickly yellow tinge that spread across victims' skin, starting with the whites of their eyes before consuming every visible surface. Infected men vomited a black coffee ground substance that was actually partially digested blood from internal hemorrhaging. Caribbean trading routes documented in 1688 show entire crews decimated within a week of making port in tropical harbors. The fever caused such violent shaking that men had to be tied to their bunks to prevent them from injuring themselves against the ship's wooden walls. Their urine turned dark red, then black. Evaluate the psychological torture of ergotism as contaminated rye bread drove sailors to the brink of insanity. Known as St. Anthony's Fire, this fungal poisoning caused horrific hallucinations where men saw their limbs crawling with insects or believed their crewmates were transforming into sea monsters. The ergot alkaloids caused severe muscle spasms and burning sensations in the extremities, as if someone was holding red-hot coals against their skin. Venetian merchant records from 1595 describe entire crews who had to be restrained after consuming moldy grain, their screams echoing across the water for miles. Gangrene often followed, with limbs literally falling off as blood flow ceased. Completely. The convulsions never stopped until death brought mercy. Perceive the devastating effects of beriberi as it attacked the nervous system and heart. This thiamine deficiency caused 2 distinct forms of agony: wet beriberi, which led to congestive heart failure and fluid retention that swelled limbs to enormous proportions, and dry beriberi, which caused muscle wasting and paralysis that left men as helpless as newborns. Asian trade route documentation from 1671 shows sailors whose legs became so swollen they burst open, leaking clear fluid that attracted flies and maggots. The neurological damage was irreversible, leaving survivors unable to walk or control their bodily functions. Their hearts simply gave out under the strain. Remember the terror of malaria as it cycled through victims in predictable waves of destruction. Every 48 to 72 hours, infected sailors experienced fever spikes that reached 106 degrees, accompanied by violent shaking chills that made their teeth crack from chattering. The parasites multiplied in their bloodstream, clogging vital organs and causing their spleens to swell to dangerous proportions. Portuguese African expedition logs from 1652 show that ships entering tropical waters lost an average of 50% of their crew to various strains of this mosquito-borne killer. Between fever episodes, men appeared to recover, giving false hope before the next wave struck with renewed vengeance. The cycles continued until organs failed completely. Understand the horror of scurvy's advanced stages as it transformed men into walking corpses. Beyond the initial tooth loss and bleeding gums, the disease caused old wounds to reopen spontaneously, as if the body was unraveling its own healing work. Broken bones from years past would fracture again, causing sailors to collapse in agony without warning. British Admiralty records from 1697 document cases where men's legs simply snapped while walking across the deck. The Bones having become as brittle as dried wood, the psychological effects were equally devastating, with victims experiencing severe depression and paranoid delusions about their crewmates plotting against them. Death came as a twisted relief. Analyze the compound effect when multiple diseases struck the same victim. Simultaneously, ships became floating laboratories of human suffering where typhus, dysentery, and scurvy worked together to destroy whatever remained of a man's will to live. The immune system, already compromised by malnutrition and stress, crumbled under the assault of multiple pathogens competing for the same host. Dutch East India Company records from 1664 describe sailors who suffered from 4 different diseases simultaneously, their bodies becoming battlegrounds where various infections fought for dominance. These men experienced hallucinations, organ failure, and mental breakdown all at once, creating scenes that defied human comprehension. The other crew members could only watch in horror, confront the ultimate reality that ship's surgeons were often little more than barbers with sharp knives and dangerous confidence. Medical knowledge in the 1600s barely extended beyond bloodletting, amputation, and prayer, leaving diseased sailors at the mercy of treatments that often proved more deadly than the original ailments. Surgical instruments were rarely sterilized, causing secondary infections that killed more men than the procedures saved. Spanish colonial medical logs from 1678 show mortality rates of 90% for major surgical interventions, with most patients dying from shock, blood loss, or post-operative infections. The cure for most diseases involved drilling holes in skulls, purging bowels with toxic substances, or burning flesh with red-hot irons. These medical horrors compounded the existing suffering. Discover the bitter irony that the very act of seeking new worlds and riches condemned thousands of sailors to deaths more horrible than any battlefield could provide. The age of exploration was built on the bodies of men who signed up for adventure but found themselves trapped in floating chambers of medical horror. Ships that left European ports with crews of 200 healthy sailors often limped into foreign harbors with barely 50 survivors, their holds filled with the stench of death and disease. The promise of gold and glory became a lie written in blood and rotting flesh, yet men continued to volunteer, driven by desperation or ignorance of what awaited them beyond the horizon. History remembers the discoveries but forgets the screams. Conclude that these 8 diseases didn't just kill sailors, they transformed the very nature of maritime exploration, forcing improvements in medicine, nutrition, and ship design that would eventually make long voyages survivable. The zombified navigators of the colonial era paid the ultimate price for humanity's expansion across the oceans, their suffering becoming the foundation for modern naval medicine and safety protocols. Every successful voyage today stands on the graves of countless men who died horribly so that others might live to see distant shores. Their legacy isn't written in gold or glory, but in the hard-won knowledge that no treasure is worth a human life, and no discovery justifies the transformation of healthy men into walking corpses on the endless sea. These maritime zombies weren't the product of fiction or folklore. They were real men whose bodies and minds were destroyed by diseases we now prevent with simple vitamins and basic sanitation. What started as dreams of adventure became nightmares of medical horror that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Share your thoughts below about which of these diseases seems most terrifying, and let us know if you'd have the courage to embark on such a dangerous journey for the promise of discovery and wealth.